Welcome, discerning minds, to another journey into the profound depths of history. Tonight, we unearth a practice as old as conflict itself, a silent, insidious weapon that has shaped destinies and sown terror through the ages. From ancient battlefields to the shadows of modern geopolitics, we delve into the dark art of well poisoning. Settle in, let your thoughts drift, and prepare to confront a chilling facet of human ingenuity. If you find value in these quiet explorations, a simple like, a thoughtful comment, or a share helps these stories reach more curious minds. Thank you for being here, and let our journey begin. Welcome back, my friends, to Vibing History. Tonight, we journey into the depths of a truly unsettling historical tactic, one that speaks to the darker side of human ingenuity in conflict. We're talking about something far more insidious than a sword or an arrow, something silent and invisible, yet capable of bringing an army to its knees or a city to despair. We're talking about the ancient art of contamination, how water became a silent weapon of war. Imagine, if you will, the vital importance of a fresh water source in any civilization, especially in times past. A well, a spring, a flowing river, these weren't just conveniences. They were the very lifeblood of a community, a lifeline for armies on the march. To deny an enemy access to clean water, or worse, to turn that life-giving source into a harbinger of death, was a strategy as old as warfare itself. This wasn't just about thirst. It was about disease, disruption, and demoralization on a scale that could reshape campaigns and even the fate of entire regions. For centuries, well poisoning, in its crudest and most terrifying forms, was a documented strategy. It was used both offensively, a terror tactic designed to depopulate a target area and leave its inhabitants ravaged by illness, and defensively, a scorched earth maneuver to deny an invading army the sustenance it needed to advance. Picture the desperation of a besieged town, its only well tainted, or an advancing army finding every water source on their path rendered utterly unusable. The psychological impact alone would be immense, a chilling realization that even the most basic necessity for survival had been weaponized against them. And how was this achieved, you might ask? In the pre-modern era, the most common and horrifying implementation involved simply throwing rotting corpses down wells. Both animal and human remains left to decompose in the water supply would swiftly render it putrid and disease-ridden. But it didn't stop there. In what we might consider one of the earliest, albeit primitive, examples of biological warfare, those who practiced well poisoning especially favored the corpses of individuals known to have died from common, transmissible diseases of the time: the bubonic plague, tuberculosis, dysentery. Imagine the fear, the sheer panic, as an army or a town realized not just that their water was foul, but that it was actively spreading the very diseases that had claimed the lives of their enemies or their own people. It was a weapon of mass suffering, a silent plague unleashed. Now, let's cast our minds back to medieval times, where well poisoning became an important, if grim, scorched earth tactic. Consider the year 1462, a time when Prince Vlad Roman III of Wallachia, better known to history as Vlad the Impaler, faced pursuing adversaries. He was a man known for his brutal effectiveness, and his use of well poisoning was just another facet of his calculated savagery. To delay his enemies, to sow sickness and despair in their ranks, he utilized this very method, turning the landscape itself into a weapon against those who sought to follow him. The image of Vlad, whether real or embellished, conjures a terrifying efficiency in the use of such tactics. Fast forward nearly 5 centuries to the brutal Winter War, a conflict far removed from the medieval era, but where desperate circumstances revived desperate measures. The Finns, facing an invading Soviet force vastly superior in numbers and resources, employed a similar strategy. They would render wells unusable, not always with human remains, but by putting animal carcasses or feces into them. This wasn't about directly killing the enemy with toxins, but about a passive yet effective form of combat, forcing the Soviets to expend precious resources on decontamination, or suffer the consequences of contaminated water, slowing their advance and draining their morale. It highlights how, even with the advent of more sophisticated warfare, the fundamental vulnerabilities to water contamination remained. As the 20th century dawned, with its rapid advancements in military logistics and medical understanding, the practice of poisoning wells began to lose much of its former potency against organized forces. Modern armies, with their secure and decontaminated supplies, could mitigate the immediate impact of such tactics. Yet, even then, the dark allure of water contamination persisted. During the First World War, for instance, as part of Operation Alberich, German forces were documented poisoning wells in France, a testament to the enduring belief in its effectiveness as a disruption tactic, even if its ultimate impact was diminishing. But the story doesn't end with the First World War. The shadows of this ancient tactic stretched even further into the 20th century, taking on new and even more chilling dimensions. After the horrors of World War II, a paramilitary organization named NACAM, comprised of approximately 50 Holocaust survivors, sought a terrible vengeance for the murder of 6 million Jews. Their leader, Abba Kovner, traveled to Mandatory Palestine with a chilling objective: to secure large quantities of poison for the explicit purpose of contaminating water mains in Germany, hoping to kill a vast number of Germans. His followers even managed to infiltrate the water system of Nuremberg. However, fate intervened. Kovner was arrested upon his arrival in the British zone of occupied Germany and forced to act quickly. He jettisoned the poison overboard. The scale of their intended reprisal is truly staggering to contemplate, a stark reminder of the desperate and devastating ripple effects of immense suffering. And the narrative, regrettably, continues. During the 1948 Palestine War, there have been accusations and reports of Israel's own biological warfare program, which allegedly included operations to poison the wells and water supplies of certain Palestinian towns and villages. One particularly disturbing account describes an operation that supposedly caused a typhoid epidemic in Acre in early May of 1948. Another attempt, reportedly in Gaza, was thankfully foiled by the Egyptians later that same month. These are grave allegations, indicative of how the deliberate contamination of water can become entangled in the most bitter and protracted of conflicts. Even as the 20th century drew to a close and into the 21st, accusations of well poisoning continued to surface. During the Kosovo War, this charge was brought up most notoriously, highlighting how easily such claims can spread in the fog of conflict and desperation. And in recent memory, in the occupied Palestinian territories, Israeli settlers have faced condemnation due to suspicions of poisoning the wells of local villages. These recent events underscore that while the potency of well poisoning against a modern, organized military might have waned, its devastating impact on civilian populations and its capacity to incite fear and suffering remain tragically relevant. This history, while disturbing, is crucial to understand. It reveals a primal fear, a vulnerability that humanity has grappled with for millennia. It also sets the stage for our next segment, where we will explore how the very concept of well poisoning extended far beyond the physical act, morphing into a powerful and insidious metaphor, a weapon of falsehood and persecution that fueled centuries of anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred. The physical act of poisoning water is horrific enough, but the accusation of it, the libel, as we shall see, carried a venom of its own. But before we delve into that darker, more metaphorical side of well poisoning, take a moment to reflect on the sheer desperation that must have driven both the perpetrators and the victims of this ancient weapon. The desperation of an army facing thirst and disease, the terror of a community watching its lifeline turn into a death trap. These are the visceral realities that underscore the power of water, not just as a source of life, but as a silent, devastating tool of war. Welcome back to Vibing History. In our last segment, we began to uncover the disturbing reality of well poisoning, a tactic as old as warfare itself, a silent weapon wielded not with steel or fire, but with the very essence of life, water. We delved into its ancient origins, understanding how the simple act of contaminating a vital resource could spell doom for armies and populations alike. We saw how something as primal as a rotting corpse could be transformed into an instrument of terror, an early, horrific form of biological warfare designed to sow disease and despair. But the story of well poisoning doesn't end in the ancient world. Like a sinister echo, its methods and motives have evolved, adapting to the changing landscapes of conflict, even as the world around it progressed. Today, we journey further, beyond the dusty battlefields of antiquity, to witness how this dark art has been refined and repurposed, becoming a tool not just of physical destruction, but of psychological warfare and historical infamy. As the centuries rolled on, the grim efficacy of well poisoning as a scorched earth tactic remained undeniable. Consider the chilling actions of Prince Vlad Roman III, the Impaler of Wallachia in 1462. Known for his brutal efficiency, Vlad understood the power of psychological warfare and the devastating impact of denying an enemy sustenance. As his adversaries pursued him, he would not merely retreat. He would leave behind a trail of poisoned wells, not only to sicken and slow his pursuers, but also to sow fear and desperation in their ranks. It was a macabre chess move, where the board was the land itself, and the pawns were the very lives of men. Fast forward nearly 500 years, and we find this same grim strategy being employed in the unforgiving cold of the Winter War. The Finns, facing a numerically superior Soviet invasion, understood that they could not match their enemy in sheer force. So, they turned to the land itself, making it an accomplice in their defense. By rendering wells unusable with animal carcasses or even human waste, they waged a passive yet insidious war against the invading Soviet forces. It wasn't about outright victory in battle. It was about attrition, about making every step forward for the enemy a struggle, a drain on their resources, and a constant reminder of the unseen dangers lurking beneath the surface. These weren't acts of grand military strategy in the conventional sense. They were acts of survival, born from desperation and a profound understanding of the vulnerabilities of even the most formidable army. However, as the 20th century dawned, bringing with it the dawn of truly modern warfare, the potency of well poisoning began to wane. Organized forces, with their sophisticated logistics and advanced medical understanding, could now ensure secure and decontaminated supplies. The days when a single poisoned well could decimate an entire army were largely over. Yet the instinct to weaponize water persisted, finding new, albeit less widespread, applications. During the First World War, even as the world grappled with the unprecedented scale of industrialized slaughter, German forces, in their strategic withdrawal during Operation Alberich, still resorted to poisoning wells in France. It was a lingering echo of an older form of warfare, a final spiteful gesture to deny the pursuing Allied forces any comfort or easy resupply. It speaks to the deep-seated human impulse to inflict maximum damage, to leave nothing but ruin in one's wake, even as the world hurtled towards a new era of destructive capability. But the most chilling instances of modern well poisoning often stem not from conventional military strategy, but from the raw, unyielding desire for revenge. After the horrific conclusion of World War II, a paramilitary organization named NACAM emerged, comprised of about 50 Holocaust survivors. Their leader, Abba Kovner, driven by an unimaginable grief and a thirst for vengeance for the murder of 6 million Jews, sought to retaliate in kind. His plan was audacious and terrifying: to acquire vast quantities of poison and contaminate the water mains of German cities, aiming for a massive, indiscriminate reprisal. Kovner traveled to Mandatory Palestine to secure the deadly agents. His followers, fueled by righteous anger, even managed to infiltrate the water system of Nuremberg, a city deeply symbolic of Nazi atrocities. Yet fate, or perhaps a higher power, intervened. Kovner was arrested upon his arrival in the British zone of occupied Germany, forced to throw the poison overboard, his horrific plan ultimately thwarted. It's a stark reminder of the depth of human suffering and the desperate, often dark, lengths to which individuals will go when pushed beyond the brink. The shadow of well poisoning also falls heavily on the 1948 Palestine War. It's a contentious and deeply painful chapter in history, marked by accusations and counter-accusations. During this conflict, there are documented instances where Israel, as part of its biological warfare program, was alleged to have poisoned the wells and water supplies of certain Palestinian towns and villages. One such operation reportedly caused a typhoid epidemic in Acre in early May of 1948. A similar attempt in Gaza later that month was said to have been foiled by Egyptian forces. These events, shrouded in controversy and deep historical wounds, illustrate how the weaponization of water continued to be a grim feature of conflicts, not merely to disrupt armies, but to inflict widespread suffering on civilian populations, further entrenching animosity and mistrust. And as we moved into the late 20th and early 21st centuries, accusations of well poisoning, though often less about direct military strategy, continued to resurface, particularly in regions of deep-seated conflict. The Kosovo War, for instance, saw such allegations arise, highlighting the persistent psychological impact of such threats. More recently, in the 21st century, concerns have been voiced, leading to condemnations of Israeli settlers in occupied Palestine due to suspicions of poisoning village wells. These contemporary instances, whether substantiated or not, demonstrate how the specter of well poisoning continues to haunt volatile regions, becoming a powerful, if often unproven, weapon in the narratives of grievance and conflict. But beyond its grim application on the battlefield, the concept of well poisoning has taken on a far more insidious and devastating form, that of libel, of false accusation, designed to poison minds and demonize entire groups of people. This psychological well poisoning has proven to be a weapon of mass destruction in its own right, leading to centuries of persecution and unspeakable atrocities. In medieval times, when scientific understanding was rudimentary, the outbreak of disease was a terrifying mystery. The existence of viruses and bacteria, of course, was utterly unknown. When sudden illness struck, when death swept through communities, the easiest explanation, and often the most emotionally satisfying, was poisoning. Europe, particularly in the late Middle Ages, was repeatedly ravaged by the Black Death, a plague of unimaginable scale, wiping out as much as 50% of urban populations. In their profound distress and desperate search for answers, the emotionally distraught survivors looked for scapegoats, and often they found them in the city-dwelling Jews of the Middle Ages. Living in their walled, segregated ghetto districts, distinct in their customs and beliefs, they became easy targets for suspicion. An outbreak of plague, therefore, became the horrific trigger for widespread Black Death persecutions. Imagine the terror. Hundreds of Jews rounded up, accused of poisoning wells to spread the plague, then burned alive at the stake, or trapped in synagogues and private homes that were set ablaze. This wasn't just physical violence. It was an entire community's reputation, their very existence, poisoned by a lie. The esteemed historian Walter Laqueur, in his powerful book, The Changing Face of Anti-Semitism, From Ancient Times to the Present Day, sheds crucial light on this dark lineage. He notes that while the mass physical attacks against Jewish poisoners largely subsided after the Black Death, the accusation itself became an enduring, venomous part of anti-Semitic dogma and language. It lingered, a toxic seed waiting for the right conditions to sprout again. And sprout it did. In the early days of 1953, in Stalin's final, paranoid grip on power, the chilling echo of the medieval accusation resurfaced in the form of the doctor's plot. Hundreds of Jewish physicians across the Soviet Union were arrested, some brutally killed, on the fabricated charge of having poisoned prominent communist leaders. It was the same ancient lie, cloaked in modern political rhetoric, but with the same devastating goal: to demonize, to purge, to consolidate power through fear. This venomous libel continued its insidious spread. In the 1980s and 1990s, In radical Arab nationalist and Muslim fundamentalist propaganda, the accusation evolved yet again, now claiming that Jews were actively spreading AIDS and other infectious diseases. It's a sickening progression, demonstrating how the core anti-Semitic trope of the Jewish poisoner can mutate and adapt to any era, any new fear, always with the same malicious intent. Even in the 21st century, allegations of well poisoning, tightly interwoven with antisemitism, have continued to emerge in the discourse surrounding modern epidemics and pandemics. From swine flu to Ebola, avian flu, SARS, and even the recent global struggle against COVID-19, the ancient, baseless accusations have been resurrected, a testament to the enduring power of prejudice and the ease with which fear can be weaponized against an already marginalized group. It's a stark and painful reminder that some of the most dangerous poisons are not found in wells, but in the minds of those who seek to divide and conquer. In a particularly striking and recent instance, Palestinian Authority President and PLO Chairman Mahmoud Abbas, in an address to the European Parliament on June 23, 2016, made an unsubstantiated and deeply inflammatory allegation. He accused Israeli rabbis of poisoning Palestinian wells. This egregious claim, as it turned out, was based on false media reports, citing a non-existent Rabbi Shlomo MLMA, or ML-MAD, from a non-existent council of rabbis in the West Bank settlements. Abbas's words, delivered with conviction, were chilling. Only a week ago, a number of rabbis in Israel announced and made a clear announcement, demanding that their government poison the water to kill the Palestinians. Isn't that clear incitement to commit mass killings against the Palestinian people? The speech, shockingly, received a standing ovation. It was immediately and rightly described as echoing anti-Semitic claims. Just a day later, however, under immense international pressure, Abbas was forced to admit that his claims at the EU were baseless, further stating that he didn't intend to do harm to Judaism or to offend Jewish people around the world. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in response, accurately characterized Abbas's speech as spreading a blood libel, drawing a direct line back to the medieval accusations that cost countless Jewish lives. This episode vividly illustrates the enduring and dangerous legacy of the well-poisoning libel. It shows how easily such ancient, hateful tropes can be resurrected and weaponized in modern political discourse, regardless of the truth, regardless of the devastating historical consequences. It reminds us that while the physical act of poisoning a well may have lost some of its military efficacy, the psychological well poisoning of an entire people through defamation and false accusation remains a potent and terrifying force, capable of stirring hatred, igniting prejudice, and poisoning the very fabric of society. As we conclude this segment, we are left with a sobering realization. The act of well poisoning, whether through physical contamination or through the insidious spread of libel, represents a profound betrayal. It is a betrayal of trust, a weaponization of the essential elements of life, and a deliberate attempt to break the bonds of community. From the desperate tactics of ancient warlords to the calculated cruelty of modern biological warfare, and especially through the venomous accusations that have fueled centuries of persecution, The story of well poisoning is a stark reminder of humanity's darker impulses. In our next and final segment, we will delve deeper into the venom of falsehood, exploring how these accusations, these insidious lies of well poisoning, have shaped narratives, fueled centuries of persecution, and continue to cast a long, dark shadow over our understanding of history and human nature. Join me as we uncover the true cost of these ancient slanders. Until then, keep vibing with history. Welcome back, my friends, to Vibing History. In our journey so far, we've explored the grim realities of water contamination as a brutal tactic of war, from ancient battlefields to the more organized conflicts of the modern era. We've seen how the very source of life could be weaponized, turning a vital necessity into a silent harbinger of death. But the story of well poisoning doesn't end with physical acts of sabotage. It twists and turns, morphing into something far more insidious, a phantom weapon wielded not against a physical enemy, but against entire communities, against truth itself. Today, we delve into the murky depths of accusation, into the chilling history of how the concept of well poisoning became a venomous libel, fueling centuries of persecution, prejudice, and outright lies. This is the story of how a wartime tactic transcended the battlefield and became a tool of hatred, haunting generations and leaving a bitter taste in the waters of history. Imagine, if you will, the world before the microscope, before the understanding of germs and bacteria. A world where disease struck with terrifying randomness, decimating populations without warning, without explanation. In such an era, any sudden deterioration of health, any widespread sickness, was often attributed to malevolent forces, to a deliberate act of poisoning. It was a terrifying, unknown enemy, and fear, as it always does, sought an identifiable face, a tangible culprit. This brings us to the late Middle Ages, a time of immense upheaval and suffering when Europe was repeatedly ravaged by the Black Death. Crowded cities, already breeding grounds for illness, were hit with unimaginable ferocity, with death tolls often soaring to 50% or more of the population. Can you even begin to comprehend the psychological trauma of such an event? The air thick with the smell of death, the constant dread, the desperate search for answers where none seemed to exist. In this climate of utter despair and panic, suspicion began to fester. And tragically, the city-dwelling Jews of the Middle Ages, often living in walled-off, segregated ghetto districts, became easy targets. Their distinct communities, their different customs, their very separation made them stand out. And when the plague struck, the terrified survivors, in their irrational grief and anger, turned on them. The outbreak of plague became the trigger for horrific persecutions, a terrifying chapter in history where hundreds of Jews were burned at the stake, or rounded up in synagogues and private houses, which were then set aflame. The accusation was simple yet devastating. They had poisoned the wells. Walter Laqueur, in his insightful work, The Changing Face of Anti-Semitism, from ancient times to the present day, sheds a harsh light on this enduring libel. He writes that while mass attacks specifically against Jewish poisoners waned after the Black Death, the accusation itself became part and parcel of anti-Semitic dogma and language. It embedded itself into the collective unconscious, a toxic seed waiting for the right conditions to sprout again. And sprout it did. Fast forward to the early 1950s, to the twilight of Stalin's reign in the Soviet Union. The chilling echoes of medieval paranoia resurfaced in the infamous doctor's plot. Hundreds of Jewish physicians were arrested, and some even killed, on the fabricated charge of having deliberately caused the death of prominent communist leaders. The accusation of poisoning, once aimed at water sources, was now aimed at the very hands meant to heal, a grotesque twist on an old, familiar lie. And the venom continued to spread, finding new hosts in the 1980s and 90s, when radical Arab nationalist and Muslim fundamentalist propaganda revived these age-old slanders, accusing Jews of spreading AIDS and other infectious diseases. It's a testament to the enduring power of such hateful narratives, how they can adapt and resurface across centuries, across continents, across different diseases. Indeed, even in our modern era, with all our scientific understanding, the shadow of well poisoning and its anti-Semitic undertones continues to linger. We've seen these allegations entwined with the discourse around recent epidemics and pandemics, from swine flu to Ebola, avian flu, SARS, and even COVID-19. It's a stark reminder that even with the most advanced knowledge, the human capacity for irrational fear and prejudice remains. A particularly striking example occurred in 2016, when Palestinian Authority President and PLO Chairman Mahmoud Abbas addressed the European Parliament in Brussels. In his speech, he made an unsubstantiated allegation, claiming that Israeli rabbis were inciting the poisoning of Palestinian wells. He stated, and I quote, "Only a week ago, a number of rabbis in Israel announced and made a clear announcement, demanding that their government poison the water to kill the Palestinians. Isn't that clear incitement to commit mass killings against the Palestinian people?" This claim, he asserted, was based on false media reports of a Rabbi Shlomo MLMA or MLMAD from a non-existent council of rabbis in the West Bank settlements. The initial reaction to Abbas's speech was a standing ovation. Think about that for a moment. A false accusation, echoing centuries of anti-Semitic tropes, delivered on such a prominent stage, met with applause. It highlights the deeply ingrained nature of these prejudices, and perhaps a lack of critical scrutiny in the moment. However, just a day later, Abbas himself admitted that his claims at the EU were baseless, and that he didn't intend to do harm to Judaism or to offend Jewish people around the world. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in response, rightfully described Abbas's statements as spreading a blood libel. This incident serves as a powerful illustration of how easily these ancient libels can be resurrected, and the damage they can inflict. It shows us that, while the physical act of poisoning a well may be a relic of a bygone era in many contexts, the metaphorical poisoning of minds through false accusations remains a very real and dangerous weapon. The venom of falsehood, once unleashed, can seep into the collective consciousness, contaminating understanding, fostering division, and perpetuating a cycle of hatred that stretches back through time. The history of well poisoning, therefore, is not just a tale of ancient warfare or medieval tactics. It is a profound and disturbing narrative about human fear, about the desperate need to find blame, and about the devastating consequences when that blame is directed at innocent communities. It reminds us of the fragility of truth and the enduring power of lies. As we conclude this segment, and indeed, this exploration of well poisoning, let us remember the importance of critical thought, of seeking out facts, and of resisting the siren call of simplistic explanations, for the wellsprings of our shared humanity depend on it. As we emerge from the shadows of this particular historical chapter, the echoes of poisoned wells and poisoned accusations linger, reminding us of humanity's enduring capacity for both cruelty and belief. This was but a glimpse into a practice that has flowed through the veins of history, a testament to the fragile line between survival and devastation. I hope this quiet exploration has offered you both insight and reflection. If it has, consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who appreciates the unvarnished truth, and of course, following for more journeys into our shared past. What were your thoughts on tonight's narration? And what hidden corners of history would you like us to illuminate next? Until then, sleep well or focus deeply, and keep seeking the knowledge that surrounds us.